There are also, you make clear in the book that we're not the bottom rung of this hierarchical ladder, humanity as a whole. There are lower beings, which include the shadow people and these various other things. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I've set it out quite broadly, and I'm sure there's a lot more to articulate on that subject. But in essence, they have reached a point in their own consciousness where perhaps they're not so focused on the development of soul and they're more focused on expression of personality. And in the book, I talk about the kind of the journey that we human beings have had, where, at one point in the development of our consciousness, we were very focused on expressing ourselves through the personality, which has by its very nature a lower or less kind of elevated agenda than the soul. So the personality and the soul are, two opposite ends of the spectrum. They're different polarities, and they each have their place, but really they represent a continuum of growth, of spiritual growth. And so back in the proverbial day, and linear time is a whole other subject, but for ease, I'm going to refer to, time as we would ordinarily refer to it. If we look at that point in the development of our consciousness, it may have been helpful for us to work with some of those beings as we learned to express ourselves through the personality. Now, there are many people, obviously, still in existence in the world today who are not yet as conscious or awake. They're still expressing personality, but the point is, the overarching objective of humanity is to become awakened and aware of soul. So I guess where I'm going is there are beings out there who do not have the same consciousness as us, and they do therefore operate in a way, or can operate in a way, which is counter to where we're wanting to head now. And they actually have a more destructive agenda in some cases, unfortunately, because for reasons unknown to us, they're still able to access the current plane that we operate in, the particular point in proverbial time that we find ourselves in from a consciousness evolution point of view. And I guess that's part of the polarities that we need to transcend as humanity. We always have to deal with so-called good and evil. That's part of our growth, and that's just one aspect of it. But it helps to be mindful of these beings because some of us are certainly more sensitive to this dynamic than others, and you can see that in the natal chart. But equally, the more we work energetically, the more visible we become and more susceptible we become towards being influenced by them, particularly if their agenda is counter to our agenda, which is to awaken humanity, and their agenda is fundamentally to hold humanity back.
Hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And you, in your book, you right now we're talking about the higher and the lower beings. You made a really interesting point in your book when speaking about the higher beings, where you point out that people develop this relationship of like unending I don't know, I can't think of the word right now.
Unconditional.
Yeah, like unconditional service to these deities, hoping to get things in return. They're always offering things and giving things. And you talk about this kind of like imbalanced deities and how it's an imbalanced relationship. And it's
Yes.
interesting because even though they're elevated, you speak them, but they're still flawed. They're kind of like, that guy or that woman who is just great at everything, but there's something off about them, and they're kind of like maybe unbalanced, and they can kind of be a destructive force to the people around them.
Yeah.
I found that really interesting. I've never heard it said that way before. Because you're looking at these things, even though they're much more powerful than we are, they're still
Yeah.
flawed. And again, could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. It's interesting, isn't it? I guess it's important to not lose sight of the fact that these beings are not necessarily more elevated from a spiritual growth perspective. They're still operating very much along the lines of what we would generally refer to as ego, for simplicity's sake. But essentially, they may have a far more selfish agenda, and they have been fed by the energy in the form of thought forms and so on. I mean, you do get separate thought forms which are fueled by kind of worshipping over ages by human beings, different perhaps from the original entities or deities. And there is some overlap, I think, between these deities and some of the lower beings that I also referred to. And it's not always easy to be able to draw the line, but the key thing is just to be able to identify when a being is not operating unconditionally in service to divinity, or is not sort of tuned into that, but in fact has selfish agendas and wants to hold back human beings, essentially. Now, some of these beings operate on a particular level in terms of service to the cosmos and in terms of being part of the fabric of the universe or the cosmos. And that's slightly different. So you in magical workings, you can leverage some of them, obviously, with a lot of discernment and care, because they can be dangerous. Um, but it is quite a complex web, and some of them, might not have a destructive agenda, but they can be dangerous, as I say, and those are distinct from the beings who do have